I learned 22 tips to lose fat with eating the same calories with Dr. Michael. He recently completed his PhD in experimental medicine from McGill, and he has his bachelor's and master's as well from McGill. And he's currently working on a startup on providing therapies of neuroimmunological disorders and for bone regeneration. And over to you, Michael. You can start, and then we
All
can chit
right.
chat about it at the end. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. So yeah, it's a great pleasure being here. And if anyone has any questions during the presentation, you could always feel free to interrupt and ask. But there'll also be questions I will be asking you. So yeah, just feel free to respond to those. All right. So yeah, I will be covering 22 tips for losing weight while having the same calories. And the most important thing here is to know that a lot of these are within our control and involve controlling our own hormonal systems. So just because there are hormones, it doesn't mean that it has to be a mystery to control them to get what we want out of them. And there's lots of people to this day that are athletes, for instance, that make use of this for their own careers. So let me just make sure that the slides can move here. Okay, so just for your information, there's multiple types of athletes here that could include runners, for instance, that may look like most of us, or bodybuilders, where bodybuilders have an even lower mass that is fat, and they instead have more muscle tissue. This is largely on the basis of having increased amount of hormones such as somatotropin that can reposition fats throughout our body, so it's less in the abdomen area and more in muscle tissue, as well as having high insulin sensitivity, so you could grow from insulin and not have too much fat presence at the same time, and also increasing hormones like osteocalcin, for which I would also cover. So a lot of this is also on the basis of the total amount of calories that you have, which is actually a bit higher than that of a runner. So even though there's a higher amount of calories, you're not going to have more fat. And that's because the total amount of calories that you eat is not the most important factor. It's instead how you have the calories that then influences the types of hormones that you will possess within your body. Now, even stronger than a bodybuilder is the power lifter. And that's because muscle tissue has been shown to be influenced by fat tissue. If there's fat and tissue intertwined with your muscles, they release hormones and paracrine factors that will influence the maturation of your muscle tissue. And this also includes more fast twitch muscles. So these fast twitch fibers allow you to be stronger. So it's perfect for his profession to have more fat on him. That's just what he wants. So he goes through certain mechanisms throughout his day in order to boost the amount of, say, lower amount of leptin sensitivity. And that makes you less likely to want to burn off the fat that you have, as well as higher amounts of cortisol and insulin simultaneously in order to mature your mesenchymal stem cells that can be within muscle tissue, for instance, and turn them into fat cells. Because that's exactly what this man will want. And even more than this is the sumo wrestler, which coincidentally and shockingly matches a bit of our lifestyle in North America, where sumo wrestlers may have a higher fat content within their body based on having more cortisol in the beginning of their day, where they end up waking up very early, starving, and working very hard doing their squats and pushes. And afterwards, they will have a large meal. And based on their starvation that they were going through, their cortisol levels are still high while they have their big meal. And then they have an overlap of cortisol and insulin, which is the recipe for making fat cells. And after every meal, they will also fall asleep. And this allows them to not be conscious when they have their fat cells on them. Sorry, not be conscious of the materials and like nutrients that'll be within their blood, all the high sugar and blood fat. So they're not going to want to work it off. Instead, the fat cells will absorb it. So this coincidentally matches our lifestyle a bit because we have small meals in the morning. We're oftentimes starving as we go to work. And then we have a big meal oftentimes right before going to sleep. Then we fall asleep on that. Although a sumo wrestler will go through a sleeping process twice in their day in order to maximize their gains of fat tissue, because this is important for their whole career. So we would want to understand these people to make sure that you have the type of body that you would want. And if you want to limit the amount of sumo wrestler body type, then it's important to prevent the combination of cortisol and insulin. And the tips that I'll be covering later on include this mechanism. Okay, so just want to make sure. Okay, so some of the hormones that I will include talking about today include cortisol and insulin. Cortisol is a steroid here, and insulin in a hexamer here works in unison with cortisol in order to make fat tissue, whereas leptin and somatotropin and sclerostin are also involved in processing fat tissue. Leptin produced by fat cells prevents you from gaining weight, and sclerostin produced by osteocytes in your bone allows you to be more likely to produce a fat cell. But there's ways of controlling it by stimulating your bones, for instance. And somatotropin is like the fountain of youth hormone, and it kind of represents you being leaner. So our body, you can imagine like this sculpture, can be influenced by all these hormones, but there's ways of controlling them, and that includes the tips that we'll be covering. And it's important to remember this fundamental mechanism here. Within the lab or within our body, you'll have mesenchymal stem cells that can turn into fat cells within about 2 weeks. And even after the third day of just adding cortisol and insulin to these cells, whether it's in a dish or within your body, then you would be able to have cells that are producing fat droplets. It's becoming an adipose cell. So cortisol and insulin is technically all you need. And we practice this within the lab, and it's very well known. There's even concentrations and protocols on doing it. Dexamethasone is just a more active version of cortisol, and this will allow you to create fat cells. So dexamethasone or cortisol, assume it to be the same thing with insulin. What does this represent? It represents high stress conditions, that's the cortisol, and insulin would represent high amounts of sugar intake. Even when you just taste sugar on your tongue, you're stimulating the production and release of insulin from your beta islet cells of your pancreas. And you will then have the combination of external resources of energy, that's the insulin, and internal resources of energy, that's the cortisol. And the combination of this makes you have too much energy, so then it represents an evolutionarily sustained system of creating fat cells. So the way to control this is to prevent having high cortisol and insulin at the same time. So the way of doing this is to de-stress as you eat, or to not eat when you are chronically either agitated, or at least have fiber and protein in order to slow down the absorption of these calories so that you don't have an insulin spike while you have a cortisol spike, because it's an overload for your body. All right, so these are the more essential tips for losing body weight. And let's move on. So the first tip is to avoid starvation and restriction of your calories. So there's some studies rather recently showing that even if you're to have normal meals, but just restrict the amount of calories that you consume, then you will already be increasing your cortisol levels, which is a part of the recipe for creating fat cells in the future. When those fat cells are born, then you're going to have an uncontrollable desire to just eat that food. So because now there's more fat cells born, so then they're hungry and they want you to eat more. So the main idea here is to be eating, don't starve yourself, allow yourself to eat whenever you're hungry, and be satisfied with every meal. That way you will not have as much cortisol. And it's well known that higher cortisol levels linked with chronic stress leads to weight gain. And one way of being stressed is to be starved or to be very hungry. And you'll even notice your behavior changes. You're more agitated. So you could gauge that and make sure that you're not agitated after your meal or before your meal. And that happens by being satiated, having a full meal. In addition, there are studies that showed that if you have the same meals but have them earlier in your day, then you end up losing weight. And this is the opposite of what sumo wrestlers do. So you know that sumo wrestlers will have their effect of gaining weight from doing that. So you should probably try to do the opposite. And studies show that if you were to eat later, then you end up gaining, if you have earlier meals, then you'll have a better weight loss rate. And over here on the right, you'll see day by day, you end up having a lower body weight when you are an early eater. So it's very well recognized. Try to have your meals whenever you're hungry, and that tends to be in the earlier portion of your day, and then you'll be better off. You'll end up having less of a chronic amount of cortisol, because if you target your cortisol early, then it won't sustain itself for too long afterwards. But if you were to have your cortisol elevated for almost like half a day straight, even when you have your meal, your cortisol is still up. So it's important to, focus on that. Just try to eat whenever you're hungry and eat those earlier meals faster, so that you're not, but earlier in the day, so that you're not going to have too much of the chronic cortisol elevation. Now, it's important to start the meals with fiber and protein. That way you could have the exact same meal, but you're not going to have an insulin spike. You'll have time to have cortisol go down so that insulin can go up without it being at the same time as cortisol. So this could be done by simply having a bit more of the fiber and protein first, and then having your sweets. And you get sweeter and sweeter at the end of your meal. So you have your desserts last, and that's just the most palatable thing to do. We enjoy doing that because it's a part of our evolutionary history. And there's data that shows that if you were to do this and have more fiber and protein in every meal, then you do in fact lose weight. So this is shown through some study looking at general loss of body fat or in waist size, and other studies showing that there's in general more weight loss when you include fiber and protein in the meal. So make sure to look at those 4 components of every meal. Make sure there's sugar, make sure there's protein and fat, and make sure there's fiber. When you make sure you include all 4 of them, then you're having a complete meal. If I just have the fish and the rice, it may feel good, but it's not the complete deal. The complete deal is including a bit of fiber with that. Now we're going to do a little game here. So let's try to complete the dish. Here we have a lasagna, delicious. But the game is not, of course, to complete it by eating it. It's to complete it by giving it its full nutritional value. So over here, just dissect what the lasagna is and think what should be added to it. Here we have some options. There's the high protein component, chicken. You could add fiber, or you could add garlic bread. Traditionally, we would add garlic bread to it, but I'd like to know your opinion of what you would like to add to this. Fully dissect what the lasagna is to you in terms of those 4 categories: fat, protein, sugar, and fiber. What's it missing? As you guys may be thinking about it or trying to answer, the idea for solving this, you look at the lasagna, although it seems delicious on its own, it is mainly fat, sugar, with a bit of protein. It has quite a lot of meat in this, so the protein could be pretty high. But if you were to add more protein to this, you'll increase your rate of weight loss. Even though you're adding additional calories to it, you'll not have the hormones represented by, say, elevated insulin, and you will not be as stressed from not being satiated. Protein is the most satiating, so including more of that will allow you to have lower cortisol levels. So over here, you see that the lasagna is mainly missing a fiber component and a bit of protein. So if you were to add a fiber component, green leafy vegetables, you're not only supplying vitamin K, that further decreases your weight, you're also adding a protein. Well, you're adding the fiber here, but if you also add the protein to it, then it's an even better option. But B is still what the lasagna is missing the most. So adding the fiber will regulate your blood sugar, and having protein in addition to this will make it a bit better. It'll make it make you more satisfied, and even though there's more calories, you should technically be losing weight. The garlic bread will be the last thing to add to this, if you ever could. Another example. Oh, was there
Michael,
a question?
we had the answers in the chat, so like sorry to interrupt you about it,
Oh,
but like
okay, yeah. I can't seem to
yeah,
see the
yeah,
answers.
yeah. Also,
Okay, good.
there we have one question if you would want to answer it right now or towards the
Sure,
end
yeah.
of the session, it's up to you.
Sure,
So
yeah, I can answer a question.
the question is from Lauren, and she's asking if some people who, say intermittent fasting has health benefits. Are those claims true?
There are benefits, but it's a tricky thing to work with. If ever you have high cortisol due to intermittent fasting, you have a part of the recipe for gaining weight. But during that fasting period, you could tap into your fat reserves, so it can be useful. But it's hard for people to reliably do it right. In order to do the intermittent fasting right, you would want to slowly ease into the calorie that you're consuming, so that it's high fiber and high protein, for instance, at the start of it, so that you're not going to have a surge of insulin at the same time as you're cortisol. Otherwise, you're making the recipe for new fat cells to be born. And in the next coming days, you're going to have basically more hunger, more desire to eat because you gave birth to more fat cells. You don't want to have these hormonal cues that give birth to fat cells. Otherwise, you're going to be, simply desiring those candies afterwards in the next few days or even in the next few hours to feed those fat cells. You have to stop that from being born. So it's sometimes it helps to do intermittent fasting, but I'm not going to recommend it because it's hard to do it properly. But sometimes people can do it properly and it could work great for them. In fact, sometimes I could do it too, but I reliably like to limit the amount of fasting that I do. Sometimes it will happen naturally. If you were to simply sleep for 8 hours, for 2 hours before, or maybe for 2 hours afterwards, you didn't eat anything, you already kind of did your intermittent fasting. You almost did the 14 hours, for instance. But if you were to maybe avoid the prolonged starvation, then you won't have that elevated cortisol. That's a part of the recipe for making those new fat cells that even sumo wrestlers make use of. So she is right. Sometimes you can make use of it with the use of intermittent fasting. It's just difficult to work with. This is another example. We have the burger here, sugar and fat. That's mainly what's here. But it's still a good part of a meal. You could still make use of it. There's protein in this. So what would you do to complete it? You have some options here that include fiber, protein. You have fiber and protein here, and you have a little bit of sugar and fat here. Traditionally, we would add the fries to it. What would you like to add? So if I was to dissect this, I see that there's nutritional redundance with the burger and the fries. So I have a lot of sugar, not much fiber, and it's accompanied by fat. So the fat is still good for you and everything. Sugar still good for you. You shouldn't throw it out, just complete it. So the fries are redundant with that, sugar and fat. So the first thing that you should consider is perhaps the chili that not only has fiber, which this is missing, so that's one part of the four. The last part of the four is the additional protein. The beans supply that, and there's also beef in the chili too that will allow you to have all four of these things that you need: your fiber, protein, and your sugar and fat. So you have now all four of them. So having this dish accompanied with the burger allows it to be complete. Now, the salad is also a good option, but it doesn't have as much tomato that could regulate your blood sugar. This one is almost like candied sugar here, the white bread. So it's good to have the tomato that allows you to further control it, because tomato, as you may know, it works well with pasta because it controls your blood sugar levels. And so does things like mustard and vinegar. So including this could give you added benefit. The salad here is the fiber and protein component as well, so you could also add that to complete the dish. Okay, hoping this slides move. So an additional tip here, maximizing protein consumption immediately before bed helps. It prevents the blood sugar spikes that would normally come with, say, having a normal sweet meal. So this over here, if you could see this this graph over here on the left, you'll have carbs and you could have whey protein that are added. If in the case of these athletic young men that are here, you would have a bit of reduction of weight loss that would happen the next day because their metabolisms are increasing. And in the placebo, where they didn't have the sugar or the protein shakes before bed, they didn't have the benefit of the increased metabolism. So feeding yourself well is good for your metabolism, allowing you to burn more calories the next day. So you could try to make sure you're not starved before your bedtime. Having protein is a bit better. And in the case of 4 weeks of having this protein supplement for obese women, we saw that the carb drink did not work as well. So this allowed you to have more benefits if you had the protein shake, whether it's whey or casein. It was beneficial for the obese women in the study. So it shows that protein would be ultimately the best before bed, and this allows your metabolism to be better for the next day. So consider having protein. It doesn't have to be a protein shake, This is just easy for the experiment. But if you were to have protein, maybe it's lean meat. But if you're a vegan, tofu, beans, that type of thing before bed will drive your metabolism. But the sugars won't. If you have your crackers right before bed, that won't be as beneficial. So trying to make sure the slide moves. So we know these ads, the Snickers ones, when you're hungry, grab a Snickers, you're not you when you're hungry, oh Henry. These types of ads are highly misleading. They're one of the worst things to do when you are hungry, because as mentioned through the sumo wrestler basis of gaining weight, and for all of us in general, high cortisol is a part of the recipe, and you have high cortisol when you are stressed. So as you can see, the red lines here, this represents cortisol because you're stressed, because you're hungry. When you have your meal, it goes down. So you're having the spike now of insulin during that. So the cortisol is still high and the insulin is high. So this is a recipe for making fat cells. You'll now have more of them the next day. So you don't want to have that and then have more of these fat cells born so that you now produce more fat. Now, you not only have the hormonal recipe for creating fat cells when you have a sugary thing on an empty stomach, you're also having the calories for it. So it's like the worst combination. You have the hormones, cortisol and insulin, to drive differentiation of your mesenchymal stem cells to fat cells. And you now have the calories to do it, and you have too much sugar. You're going to decrease your insulin sensitivity, progress pre-diabetes or diabetes, and it's just not what you want. So you could have 2 Snickers bars, you could have 3 chocolate bars and like a piece of cake, as long as you have it strategically, not at the beginning of a meal, but as a dessert. That way, it instead will slow down your stress response later on when it's useful, and you'll not have an insulin spike at the same time as cortisol. It's useful to have these sugary foods because it actually lowers your stress levels afterwards. So I would not avoid Snickers. I would not avoid O. Henry and cake and the sweet treats. I would just have them opportunistically when your body can process it better. So you can't process it better at the beginning when your cortisol is already supplying you with blood sugar. Cortisol is coming from your adrenal glands, and it's raising your blood sugar based on your reserves from your liver and your muscle. So you already have that supply of sugar. You're going to overload the system if you have your internal and external supplies at the same time. So when you're stressed, slow down the cortisol by having a meal, as shown here in the bottom graph, and then have your sweet treat, your chocolate bar, and then it will slowly be absorbed because you have all the fiber and protein and fat that's there. And then your insulin spike comes in, and then you now do not have much of a need for cortisol because your blood sugar is already being taken care of. So your blood sugar is now being taken care of through the insulin and your blood sugar from the chocolate bar. So now you don't have to supply as much cortisol, so now you could relax. So you're making the full perfect use of it. And this is based on evolution because we never had these sweet treats immediately. We would always have like a meal and then you have like a dessert afterwards. And that's why it's the most palatable for all of us. Okay, so you may be asking, sugar, sometimes it makes you hyper or sedated. I was mentioning that it makes you sedated, but then when's the case that it makes you hyper? So you may be asking this question, and the answer is that both of them are true. So if you are starved or stressed, then your cortisol will be up. So then you're going to be stressed. But if you have your sugar supplied, then you're going to be relaxed. So this is the sedated part. So sugar does actually calm you down. So sugar can be a tool for weight loss. You just have to use the sugar properly, which is at the end of the meal. Then there's no risk really of having the cortisol and insulin together, and you can control your blood sugars. So if you have the hyperness from having too much sugar, then you're going to have an overload of the system. You're going to need fat cells there in order to store all the excess calories, because fat actually protects you. If you're chronically hyper due to the excess calories, you need to have a cell that's absorbing that excess sugar, otherwise you might faint. So evolutionarily, having more fat whenever you have insulin and cortisol protects you. So it's basically your body trying to save your life. So being hyper when you have too much sugar, make that be a gauge for when you have too much of it, so that you know, okay, next time I'll have a bit less sugar, so that I'm at the relaxed state, so that I have most weight loss. And I'm not going to have too little of my dessert so I'm stressed. sometimes if you don't have enough dessert, you don't feel relaxed after your meal. So eat enough so that you're relaxed, and then you'll be able to capitalize off weight loss. If you're chronically stressed from being undersatisfied, then you should technically gain weight. And this is just a comparison of cortisol. It should go down, and then this is your most relaxed state. Afterwards, it's uncertain what would happen because you might actually have increased cortisol due to being hyper, but it's not really that well known at the moment. So it's important to listen to your body and mind. Whenever you're eating sugar, don't be stressed in any way. So if you have any main emotional response, so shown here, this is anger, this is fear, this is you currently exercising. You'll notice after you're exercising, you don't really want to have a sweet treat all the time, but if your blood sugar is really low, then you do want it. But in most cases, you're supplying your own energy reserves through cortisol, so you tend to just want water. So lots of times you want water, and then when you're calm, then you can have the cake. But normally you'll be most calm after the meal, so the cortisol is at the lowest point. If you're crying, you're at a funeral, you can't really have sugars, can't really have something sweet, but there's some people that coincidentally eat because they are emotional, because they are sad. And this is a recipe for weight gain, because all these cases are cortisol. And then if you're having insulin with cortisol, then you have the recipe for creating a fat cell. When the fat cell is born, then you have a huge source of desire to eat. And that will happen in the next few days. So there's many cells that are at any stage of differentiation into a fat cell. It takes about 2 weeks, but there's some cells that are just 1 day away, 3 days away, 4 days away, 10 days away from becoming a fat cell. So they'll come in at various times, the new fat cells, and then you're going to need to feed them when they're born. So yeah, there's a study showing that more obese people are gauging themselves as emotional eaters. So just be aware of that and try to limit the emotional eating. And whenever you're hungry, have the main meal first and then the dessert. If you're dreaming of that main meal, have that first and then your dessert. Okay. And of course, it's good to control sleep. This is the only slide that I have on sleep, but sleep is basically the second most important thing that you could do in your life. The first most important thing is eating right, because you simply cannot live without having new resources in your body. Some people, they could have various sleep schedules and still be fine. Changes from person to person, but it's absolutely essential. Sleep is like the second most important thing that you could do. Exercise is like a very far third. You could sometimes live your entire life without exercise and you could still have a pretty good body mass index, but sleep is really important. So although this is the only slide for it, it's just very simple. Your growth hormone production happens mainly while you sleep. So here's the great spike while you sleep. Growth hormone is like the fountain of youth hormone. It's somatotropin that I was showing on the previous slide. The bodybuilders also have high somatotropin. It represents you being able to reposition the fat within your belly area in other areas. It makes you more youthful, more energetic because it boosts the metabolism of various cells. If you are sleep deprived, as you can see in the lower graph, you completely lost your growth hormone signal. So now you don't have that, so then you don't have your fountain of youth hormone. You're going to have a slower metabolism, and that means you won't be able to be as sensitive to insulin. So shown here in these graphs, you have the people in blue that is getting too little sleep, 4 hours of sleep. So the blood sugar goes a bit haywire. Blood sugar is high, but all you did was just not get enough sleep. And your insulin, that spiked too. So you're going to progress poor insulin sensitivity just because you didn't sleep right. So make sure you have your somatotropin to control your metabolism, control your insulin sensitivity. That way you could progress your the thin physique that you may want. And the somatotropin or growth hormone can also be sustained by fiber and protein and exercise. Shown here on the right, exercise was a huge stimuli for the amount of somatotropin you have. And in black is for women, in white is for men. So it's like the same pattern. The exercise boosts the amount of somatotropin that you have. So if you don't sleep right, but you're still someone that just does like a little bit of an exercise, that's going to boost your fountain of youth hormone. So you could try that. And in addition, there's studies showing that in mice, when you simply have growth hormone given, that's shown here, after your a few days of having it, you end up having reduction of the fat that's in the belly area, and instead you have thickness of muscle tissue and some fat tissue that's present instead in the limb. So it makes you overall a healthier person. And there's other things that you can do, very simple, to stand while working. So instead of doing what people traditionally do, that sit down on the desk, you could raise your metabolism by having your sclerostin reduced. So sclerostin is normally produced by osteocytes within your bones. It's also produced within muscle cells, but the main source is your bones. So if you are simply standing, this is the position of maximal stimulation of your bones. If you are squatting, your bones are actually not being used, it's your muscles. So if you're in a 90-degree squat position, that's your muscles being used, but your bones are most prominently used when you're standing, and this allows your osteocytes to register signals to reduce sclerostin release. This also can go throughout your body, not just in your bones, and the reduction of sclerostin will prevent the birth of new fat cells. And that's because sclerostin normally is inhibiting Wnt signaling. Wnt signaling is just a protein pathway that produces bone building cells and muscle building cells. So if you have reduction of Wnt signaling, then you are more likely to produce a fat cell. So sclerostin, the more sclerostin you have, the more fat cells you'll produce because it's inhibiting Wnt signaling. So you're going to have less muscle production, less bone building cell production, and you'll have more fat cell. So we saw in mice that have no sclerostin that they're naturally leaner, shown here in basically both of these graphs. This is fat mass and in various parts of their body, except brown adipose tissue that's for thermogenesis and basically represents you being active. So this will not be affected. So just stand when you're working, and that's one way to have another hormone that could help you to lose weight. A very powerful hormone is osteocalcin. So there's just so much literature to summarize with this, but I'm just putting one slide here in blue. Even if you were to overeat, that's shown in blue. So having a high-fat diet, you have tons of calories here, and you would have correspondingly more weight gain. But if you have not cortisol, but osteocalcin given, then you end up having reduction of your body weight. So this allows you to take control over your body, even if you're overeating. So you're eating all the right things, but you have osteocalcin, and then now you just won't gain weight anymore. So this is these are studies done on mice, but the system is still true for humans. So the food intake here is shown to be the same. So it's not changing how much you eat. You're still pigging out. You're having tons of fat, and you'll have genes that represent you burning calories, and you'll have your glucose that is now being more in control. So here shown in orange, not only the fat is being controlled, but glucose, it's lower. And you also have more adiponectin. That's another hormone that can be driven by osteocalcin. It allows you to also drive your metabolism. That way you'll have better insulin sensitivity. So basically you could prevent diabetes by simply stimulating your bones. Standing helps, but any exercise can help. So walking more, you take time to just stand instead of sit. Take that opportunity, just a few minutes, stimulate your bones, allow you to produce those hormones so that you could eat whatever you want. You could eat even more than what you need. You could pig out, have too much fat, and then you'll still lose weight. Just make sure to keep your bones active. This isn't really produced by muscle, it's something produced by bones. Okay, so in addition to this, exercise can also reduce your cortisol. So we know that immediately after doing your workout, which is a stressful thing, you then have a period that could last for hours where your cortisol is lower. So this is known. And this study was done on patients that had depression. So it works even with people that have particularly high anxiety. There's also an interesting study where people were doing a speech test, and after a 6-week exercise program, the ones that did the 6-week exercise program appeared to have less of a stress response from their speech test. So now, even in the future, when you're doing speeches or talks, which are generally the most stressful thing, you now have control over that because you just managed to control your cortisol levels by doing exercise regularly. So the benefits of exercise, they're multifaceted. It includes even reduction of cortisol. You could also do yoga. It doesn't have to be some fancy class, but people that did do a fancy class, they did end up losing weight. If you were simply to lie down when you were stressed, this is a yoga position. If you were to breathe calmly, this is a yoga principle. If you were to remove thoughts from your mind, and just be in the present. Don't think of the future that has stress, and don't think of sadness either. That is generally your past, but just think of the present. And that helps by following orders of yoga. So you touch your toes, do this, do that. It puts you in the present, helps you to forget the stuff that's going on in life. Your stress levels will reduce, and then you will end up losing weight based on cortisol reduction. If you do this before your meals, then that would be highly beneficial. Do your workout and then your yoga, and you have a system that really works. If you eat right after the meal, you might find there's a bit of issues with that. But eating right before, if you exercise after the meal, it's a bit problematic sometimes because you're calm and it's hard to work out when you're calm. But if you have that high cortisol session, do that as a tool for weight loss, which is through exercise. Then you have the yoga to calm down. Then you eat. Then you eat. Then it's perfect. And another trick here, doing inversions by putting your head down allows your heart rate to go down because you're putting less effort to get blood to your brain. So this is a good, easy way to physiologically induce relaxation. So if you're just really stressed, you have no ability to control it, you could do this technique. You may notice that there's some benefits within seconds and minutes. But sometimes if you're really stressed, there's too much blood in your head, so you have to stand up periodically. If you have a surge of energy, it's important to use it. You could eat the same calories. You may notice after having the meal, you have a surge of energy, or some point down the line, you have a surge of energy. Typically for sugars, it happens immediately. For fats, it happens like 30 minutes or an hour afterwards. So be wary of that surge of energy, use it instead of just working endlessly. So if you were to work and you can't move, then that limits you, and unfortunately you won't be able to progress your weight loss. But if you have just a few minutes to jog during that surge of energy, you now have the benefit of growth hormone production, as shown in the previous graph, and you could now benefit from cortisol reduction as well. Overall, there's so many hormonal benefits. Just take a few minutes and then you can make use of it. If you can't go outside, you could sometimes take the stairs. And that counts. Everything counts. Every repetition counts. If you do one push-up, it counts. It does something for you. And in fact, you could even do a whole workout here based on the bars that are in the staircase, or you could do like one leg squats or something intense. You don't even need a gym time in particular. So I have a question for you guys. So we know that you're kind of designed to eat a bit more than what you need so that you do exercise. It's a part of our evolutionary history. So we understand there's other evolutionary designs, like you have to use the bathroom, you have to eat. So our office jobs make use of that and like, okay, you could have some office time away so that you go to the bathroom. So you have bathroom breaks. But in the past, we were not observant enough to acknowledge that we also need time based on our evolutionary past, based on our body's design, to exercise, because you are designed to eat a bit more. You are designed to eat a bit more calories than what you need so that you actually do stuff. It would not have worked as our species was working in the past to survive if you only had enough to get by just to sit down. That wouldn't work as a species design. Like all of our ancestors would have died. So you're designed to eat a bit more than what you need so that you do exercise with it. And for jobs around the world to not acknowledge this is to not acknowledge the very basis of humanity. So what do you think should be done? Should there be maybe 3-minute yoga sessions for all people so that they take control over their health? Maybe a 15-minute jogging session or a 30-minute weightlifting session. It doesn't have to be in a gym. In fact, you could do it all through calisthenics. You could just do, squats, jumping one-leg squats, jumping lunges. You could do push-ups, jumping push-ups, chin-ups and stuff, or even curling of your leg with your arm. You could do every single muscle group with nothing at all. But if people were educated and given time for this, they would certainly be able to take control of their life. You could just give your input on which one you would want, or if you think it's needed at all. And it should be acknowledged as a part of time away from work because it's a part of your human design. So it's important to acknowledge that being culturally normal in North America, in particular North America, compared to other developed countries, you are more likely to gain weight. Shown here in red, we have even more than 50% of the population being overweight, and it's just climbing and climbing. So be aware of this. Know that being normal is potentially a problem. And if you're that unique butterfly here, then, don't be sad. Maybe it's one of the good things. If everyone is going to be one thing and you think it's not good, then just be you. It also doesn't necessarily mean that the blue butterflies are bad. If you are what you want to be, then that's totally fine. There's also a study here showing that immigrants in Canada appear to be less likely to gain weight than those that are Canadian born. This may be due to certain aspects of culture, or maybe less effort to do certain things in life. We're not certain, but you're more likely to gain weight if you are normal in America. So there's some mental health principles to follow as well, and that also involves some hormonal systems. So prevention of boredom, depression, and anxiety helps. So we, in some studies, we saw that those that had no stress at all were a bit more likely to be obese than those that had a bit of stress. So a bit of stress is useful. If you had to run somewhere to do something every day, then that reduces your risk of weight gain. And if you had very stressful lives, then it ended up increasing your weight gain. So boredom may be an issue. It may cause you to not do what you need to do, the effort that you need to make to become thin, but the anxiety is also an issue. People that have no food security, also more likely to gain weight. People that have, say, a low income, moderately low income, that kind of represents them living and trying to control their finances on their own. These individuals were less likely to control their weight gain. These are just some trends, but be aware of them so that you're not a part of it. And sustaining positive relationships. There's tons of papers out there about qualitative benefits of people that were supportive for weight loss journeys, and it really made a difference. But negative ones were also influential. It turns out that people that are single are more likely to be thin, and simply cohabitating with someone, maybe it's linked with cortisol, maybe it's linked with stress of trying to, balance your life with someone else. It tends to lead to weight gain. These were also controlled for age, so it's not simply based on age. Also, the marriage appears to also lead to more weight gain. Maybe it's because people are just happy with what they are. It could be that, could be also stress linked. So just be aware of the trend. If it's happening to you, just be aware of it so that you can control it. The idea here is not to change your entire life or alter that aspect of life, but just be aware of it as a trend. Okay, so this one is a very particularly interesting and important point. Aspect of euphoria and goosebumps, having riveting life experiences appears to be linked with weight loss. Serotonin, for instance, simply seeing the sun raises your serotonin levels, or being happy in a non-addictive basis. This will be linked with satiation. Therefore, you may not overeat. It's also linked with lower weight gain. Epinephrine is linked with lower weight gain as well. And a laughter group, there's a laughter study where people that simply went for 12 weeks to laugh, and another control group that did not do this, there was actually more weight loss in the laughing group. So to simply be happy in life is a contribution. If you could just see a comedy and enjoy yourself, be happy, have periods of your life where you have goosebumps, this is linked with weight loss. And in addition to this, dopaminergic receptors found in your brain appear to be less active in the brains of people that are obese. So dopaminergic receptors appear to be less likely to be capable of responding to the pleasurable. These are addictive pleasures within your life. So this may be the basis for obesity, or may not be. It's not fully understood yet, but if you were to have an inability to register a positive response based on the stuff that you're doing, then maybe you will overdo it. So maybe you will overeat if you cannot register a happiness response. So this could be a reason for obesity, or maybe it's just that there are not enough aspects of life that could involve this, that could involve dopaminergic activation, that then leads you to coincidentally have obesity. It doesn't have to be a link, but it's just interesting to note and perhaps be aware of the other evidence of euphoria and its benefits. Oxytocin as well, a hormone representing affection, is also produced in men, not just women. not just women for breastfeeding, for instance, and it is linked with weight loss. So in mice that are obese, to have oxytocin treatment, which is just a little protein here, ends up reducing the weight gain. This is present day by day. So the normal obese mice would be gaining weight, but the one with oxytocin ends up losing weight or straying away from the obese design. And this is, it's rather well studied. It's pretty influential. You could perhaps try to include more of this in your life, just being happy, embracing the positives in life and stuff. So that this could also change your life. So just important to consider it. Now, including excitement and enjoyment in life could also influence epinephrine levels. This is a hormone released by your adrenal gland. So it represents the butterflies in your stomach feeling. And this is not really the same as cortisol. And instead, it increases your metabolism in various cells in your body, so then increases your insulin sensitivity. So that's another aspect. So these are various tips that are unique, and they can include additives. Eating slowly is highly beneficial. So there's a bit more satisfaction in participants that ate a meal slowly, and they ended up not wanting to really eat additional foods. They're just really happy with how things were if they ate it slowly. So this is just a benefit for you. There's positives and negatives with having meal replacements. Sometimes it was beneficial, sometimes it was not. So there's not really data that I'm really presenting on it, but it's just make sure you use it properly and then you'll be fine. It's easy to not use it properly because it has so much sugar in it and not that much fiber, but sometimes it could work for you and then it could be all that you need. So vinegar, in a Japanese study, people that had vinegar drinks were more likely to lose weight. And this was in general in multiple areas of their body. This was a loss of fat in particular. And there's multiple studies that show that there's multiple metabolic benefits of adding vinegar to your dish. Simply adding this will allow you to burn more calories and also in some cases not eat as much, not want to eat as much. It could take away the desire for sugar because it sometimes feels like it's a sweet substance. And in general, it could boost the amount of glucose transport to muscle cells that could allow you to perhaps be more metabolically active. Also, cooking with vinegar may allow you to produce more short-chain fatty acids like lactate. There's a possibility of it. And if you have short-chain fatty acids, you may be able to stimulate muscle growth directly. And if you have more metabolism, like muscle growth, then you have less ability to grow fat cells. And you also have a reduction of insulin sensitivity. Reduction of diabetes by increasing your insulin sensitivity. So vinegar could be highly beneficial even for diabetes. Now, including spices, which is not going to be really altering the calories in your meal, can also allow you to lose weight. And this is even if you're having a high-fat diet. So just like osteocalcin reduced your ability to gain weight, even if you're eating too much fat, we see that eating spices could also represent that system of simply having a spice that then allows you to either not want to eat as much, but you could still eat the same amount, and you'll just have a higher metabolism, more adipose tissue of the brown adipose tissue class. That's more likely to just be thermogenic and allow you to use calories. So if you include this and prevent diarrhea, so do not have too much of it, then you could actually lose weight. But if you overdo in one spice in particular, then you have diarrhea and then you will not be able to lose weight because diarrhea is unfortunately a negative thing. So just be aware of that. So alcohol, there's mixed reviews with it. It's a very unique system here. If you were to have alcohol completely avoided, then it's overall beneficial. You will end up losing weight. But if you are a drinker that is regular and you just have it small amounts day by day, then you also lose weight. So if you were to have, a bit of wine, maybe there's heart health benefits as previously shown in some articles, in addition to losing fat mass. But if you were to overdo it every day, so overdrink every day, then you obviously do not have the right body. You also have edema in the belly area due to liver damage. So do not overdo it every day. Do not get mixed signals about this slide and then just or consume alcohol. If you were to have small amounts regularly and you know what you're doing with it, then it could be beneficial. But it's better in most cases to just avoid altogether to prevent any liver damage. So this is just graphic images of your liver, just so that you could really value your liver and not damage it. So in this case, you'll see that the fatty liver that can be linked with your, say, excess alcohol production, alcohol usage in the liver that produces reducing agents. This would instead act as a calorie source for these liver cells so that you end up having more fat that's produced, because NADH, a reducing agent from processing alcohol, ends up fueling the cells, and there's just too many calories, so then it's stored as fat, and that could eventually lead to damage in the tissue if it progresses too much. So your liver is not only a source for detoxification, it's also a source of a youth hormone that is insulin-like growth factor, and this allows you to boost your metabolism and enable you to have insulin sensitivity. It also allows you to boost muscle growth. So it's important to try to sustain your liver as much as possible. That's why it's safer to just avoid the alcohol. But if you really know what you're doing, then you could still continue with it. So I see that it says there's 5 minutes left in the meeting, but if that is the case, then I could reopen it and then people could re-visualize it. It's odd because the system is not really supposed to do that. But yeah, let's see. This other page here about ultra-processed food, it's important to avoid it. We see that people that do engage with it will gain more weight. The unprocessed foods, of course, linked with higher fiber content, more protein content, allows you to lose weight. But if you were to complete this dish, then you'll be fine. So in this case, I would like to ask you guys a question to solve this, but if the meeting is going to cut short, then it's okay. We could reopen it. Could someone, Ayushi, do you know if the
Yeah,
meeting is going to,
I
if it's,
I'm not sure if it will shut down or how does it work because I'm not
okay.
sure. But I'm
If
trying
that's the,
to see if there is an option to like extend the
yeah, no problem. In that case, I will perhaps leave it at this slide, and if it does shut down, then people could come in.
yeah. Before you go forward, we have a question in chat like why do certain medications like antidepressant causes weight gain? So if you could answer that really quick.
Yeah, so the thing is there's multiple types of antidepressants, and for instance, the best one, that's the serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Sometimes they don't even work that well for the depression. They could make you less enthused with life. They could destabilize your happiness triggers and satiation, perhaps make you eat a bit more than what you need and just have a lackluster life, because sometimes you lose the ability to have normal positivity and pleasure responses after having the medications. And I also know some people that have taken them and they just didn't feel right afterwards. It gave some long-term effects. This is still the best for antidepressant, unfortunately. This world just has so many issues with it. It's hard to even get the benefits when you're taking these drugs. There's just so much negativity in life that unfortunately we're taking these drugs for depression, but they still don't even have their benefit. It's multifaceted, these issues. I would say it's on the basis more of your satiation, because serotonin is important for weight loss and ability to feel satisfied after a meal and know when to stop, as well as being able to just continue with enthusiasm and do activities in life. If you have no serotonin, you might be bedridden. So then it would lead to weight gain through higher sclerostin levels and other hormonal systems that are linked with being sedentary, and like reduction of osteocalcin, and for instance, there's just so many hormonal systems. So yeah, there is like a slight connection with it. I wish that there wasn't. If you find a way to prevent your depression through speaking to others, have a non-drug based approach, it could be a more stable path for positivity. sometimes having like-minded people is all that's needed. So I don't know what the deal is with the recording, if it will stop or not, but I'll just leave it here so that if people have more questions or want to rejoin, they could rejoin here. While it's going, I could perhaps mention to like you could try to answer this. So this is like a vegan dish, but an issue that we have with vegan dishes oftentimes is a lack of protein. So sometimes it's hard to sustain your weight loss if you're not capable of eating adequate protein. And if you were to simply have a dish like this, assume that there's no chicken in it. There's like a slight bit of chicken, I think, shown in this. Pretend it's completely vegan. You would think of what to add. If you were to add your chickpeas to this, it could be a bit complicated because you may have a bit too much fiber. And then if you ever contribute to diarrhea, then it could be an issue. Having tofu, because you already have all these vegetables here, may be the better balance. And to simply add more vegetables, which was kind of like an answer before, would not be the right issue here. You want to have protein and something mild in protein. You already have your sugar, you have your fiber component. You just want to add your protein and your lipid component. And tofu has both of those. It's a combination of fat and protein. So I'm not certain. Oh,
I think we can continue. Like it's gone beyond the time and it's still working. So
okay. Maybe if do you know if I'm registered as the host for it, then maybe it would stop doing the time down.
I don't think so.
Okay, no problem. It's all right. So yeah, for those that are just looking at this meal, say you were a vegan and you just wanted to fix this, just make sure to add the fat and protein to complete the dish, because remember, every meal should have those four components: the fat, the protein, the sugar, and the fiber. So generally you want to start with the fiber and the protein, and then have, fat could also be from the beginning too, because fat takes like 30 minutes to be absorbed, because it goes through your lymphatic system and then goes to your aorta. It takes a long time to go through that process, but sugars could get absorbed even sublingually, even if it's just on your tongue. And you have the insulin that's spiked as well. So sugars you really have to do last. But fats, they could be done first as well. Like say you're really hungry and you have some almonds, you could eat that, and you won't really contribute negatively. But if you're really hungry and you have a Snickers, even though there's a lot of fat in that, the sugar still goes right through you. If you were to have almonds and grapes, it would be better than having grapes, though, because there's still fiber and lipid that slows down the absorption of sugar. So if you had grapes on an empty stomach, kind of a problem. But if you have grapes and almonds, then it's a bit better, because you prevent those insulin spikes and you prevent those spikes of sugar within your blood. And you're adding calories, but even though you're adding calories, you have the right proportion of that ideal meal that is fiber, protein, sugar, and fat. Sugar generally a bit more at the end, and then you increase your weight loss. And if you have the sugar as a dessert, the bigger your dessert is, the more relaxing it is. So then you end up reaping the benefits from having low cortisol in the long run. So it's just really beneficial to have the sugar. Don't ignore sugar. Don't restrict yourself from sugar. Just have it when it was most evolutionarily sustained within our past. So yeah, those gluten-free foods, I've had them. My father also has a gluten-free diet because he has a gluten intolerance. So I'm well aware of it, and although I'm not gluten intolerant, I've still tried some of these products. But you may notice from the literature, there's a lot of weight gain that's been reported from it. So over here, you'll see multiple publications that are summarized in this one publication about how there is generally a higher body mass index based on various months of usage of the gluten-free diet, shown here, GFD, gluten-free diet. So 12 months or more than that, you have a steady increase of your BMI. In all these studies, we see that it just increases and it's significant. So these gluten-free products that basically do not have gluten anymore, because there's people that have gluten allergies, it's important to recognize that gluten was a protein. Proteins generally prevent you from gaining weight. The more protein you add, generally, the better it is. Even though you get calories from protein, you'll sustain your somatotropin levels and you'll progress your weight loss journey. So if you remove the protein from your bread, now you're in a bit of a chaotic situation where it's now more like candy. And oftentimes these foods, gluten-free foods tend to have a bit more lipid in them. Let's see if I can move the slide. Okay, so you may see this type of system here. Gluten-free foods having a bit more fat tends to be a bit more normal. This is double the fat, and the protein is lower. The sugar was a bit higher in the regular one, but it was not that significant. So here you have more fat, less protein. It's a recipe for weight gain. Even when you look at these brownies, there's the gluten-free variety of the brownies, and I've tried to look for the low-fat version sometimes, and there just isn't. So that they just don't make those products because they don't think that it's marketable or something. So you'll struggle to find a low-fat version, and you'll have instead just the better one to be the one that has gluten in it, and they have better nutritional value. So other publications look at the number of publications or number of analyses on these products. They see that there's much more that say that there's higher fat content in gluten-free products and a bit more with sugar. And all of them, every single one of them, has a lower amount of protein. So that's obviously a huge issue. Some people will say, oh yeah, I'm gonna have gluten-free stuffs to be healthy, but sometimes that's the main problem itself. So just try to avoid that if you can. But if you cannot, if you need a gluten-free diet, then you just have to do this. And maybe you could construct your own foods that have the proper relationship of fat and protein. Okay, and so I mentioned before that having too many vegetables can be a problem, and this is very true. If you do have too many vegetables, you may be able to progress diarrhea. That could then worsen your condition of being overweight. So over here we see the percentage of people that have diarrhea, and you might think that it's linked with people that are underweight, but instead it's the opposite. People with severe obesity appear to have more diarrhea. That's shown in the dark blue bar. And people that have constipation tend to be less likely to be obese. And we see that the underweight population tends to be more with constipation. And it's well known that people that are anorexic have constipation issues, and that's because the most mild thing that you could possibly have through your gut is bile. It's just the digestive juices from your liver. And this will not end up leading to an active progression for a very long time, and then you'll have a very solid stool that is passed. So if you're eating less and you're basically losing body mass because you're eating too little, then you are probably not going to have enough food to have a proper bowel movement to push it out all the way. But if you have a very large meal, particularly, you may even remember from times that you go to all-you-could-eat restaurants, you may notice, regardless of what the food is, you may have had loose stool, and that's because of the sheer mass of the food that you ate. So diarrhea may be correlated with you over-consuming food. That's one option. Or it could be correlated with stress, or it could be correlated with you having infection within the food that you had. But overall, it is correlated with obesity. And you'll see that these arrows go both ways, and that's because they all feed into each other. The stress could also progress diarrhea, and that may make you overconsume the wrong foods. So then this is also linked with weight gain. On the days when I may have had loose stool, I know I ate more junk food, and I felt I needed to have more junk food in order to have a normal stool. So this leads to insulin spikes, and it could also lead to chronic cortisol elevation because you're chronically stressed, because you're uncomfortable. And this is a recipe for weight gain because you have the cortisol and insulin set up, which in laboratories and in our own bodies helps to produce fat cells. So then in the next coming days, and maybe within the day itself, because there's fat cells that are on all days of progression of becoming fat cells, you're going to have more fat produced. So you also have stress based on cortisol that's linked with obesity, overconsumption of food, particularly insulin. Definition of obesity doesn't really always go both ways though, but this really does go both ways. Overconsumption of food will lead to diarrhea, and stress will lead to diarrhea. Infections, food that irritated you, too much spice, this could lead to weight gain. So please avoid that. And in addition to that, you could also influence your gut bacteria. So if you have too much of the wrong foods because you're craving junk food because of diarrhea, then you may not have the right gut flora that then sustains your satiation and ability to gain weight. And basically, it controls a whole lot of neurotransmitters that are produced and received from your vagus nerve that goes to your brain that relays responses of satiation, happiness, wellness. And sometimes when you have diarrhea, you won't even want to move. You'll just feel like you could only sit down all day. So this type of issue you want to prevent because having the wrong microbes in your gut can influence your overall wellness and therefore make you sedentary so that you'll have lower amounts of osteocalcin, lower amounts of sclerostin, higher amounts of sclerostin, lower amounts of osteocalcin, so that you end up gaining weight from being sedentary. And having, of course, more junk food because of this could also make you have excess calories and gain weight. So be aware that diarrhea is not an answer. It will not make you lose weight. It is correlated instead with higher weight gain. Okay, and I will try to move the slide now. Okay, and another way of treating diabetes is not only by restricting the amount of sugar that you have on an empty stomach, it's also consumption of green leafy vegetables. That is a supply of vitamin K. The most powerful version of vitamin K that's easiest to absorb is the one that's found in green leafy vegetables. So this is your main source of vitamin K. And other sources include some fermented foods like cheese and also natto. It's a bean product that's mainly used in Japan. This allows you to have vitamin K, which is not only good for blood clotting, but it's also good for altering the amount of insulin that's produced from your beta islet cells from your pancreas. So whenever you have vitamin K, you now allow a complete design for your beta islet cells. That includes these channels within your beta islet cells that produce calcium and will basically channel calcium and allow you to have a calcium flux in response to blood sugar that then allows you to have insulin released. So when vitamin K is not there, then the insulin release is chaotic. It's very high, very strong response, according to publication very recently from Ferron's lab. So if you have vitamin K by eating cheese, by eating your vegetables, then you suppress those insulin spikes, even when you overdo with your food. So you overate your sugar, but don't worry, vitamin K's got you. You're not going to have your insulin spike. So just be aware of that. That could be another option for you. And it doesn't have to be the vegetables. If you hate vegetables, have the cheese, and then you'll get your vitamin K. Okay, and artificial sugars, they've also been linked with obesity. You'll see in blue, this is the amount of sugar that we have. The artificial sugars that is shown in green, it was increasing to replace some of the sugars that we use in our products in the recent years, and we see that obesity is still going up. So it means that either the starvation of sugar was a problem that raised your cortisol, or it could mean that sugar in the artificial form was perhaps culturing bacteria that altered your microbes in your gut, or maybe it gets processed into a sugar that can be a calorie source. There's multiple options when it comes to microbes because they could process a lot of things, but all we know is that the main consensus is obesity is still rising even when you use artificial sugar. So that's the bottom line. The rest is to understand why, and we don't really know such a clear answer. It's most likely many answers simultaneously. So it could be psychological triggers to desire sweets. So it could be just there's no effect at all. It's just that you want to have more sugar on your tongue because you're always used to it. That could be the issue, or it could be increased appetite because you're not being satiated. All we know is that even when mice are used or when we are using artificial sugars, then there tends to be weight gain. And over here, we see that there's less satiation in mice. And in addition here, we see HOMA-IR. This is an analysis of your blood sugar and insulin. If it goes high, if it spikes, then that's bad. That's the whole idea here. Here we see the magnitude is at 20, and this is when artificial sweeteners are used. So it appears to be leading to insulin spikes that we do not want and sugar spikes that we do not want. Whereas if you use normal sweeteners, then your levels were more in a range that's like half that, mainly in the normal range here shown without the giant spikes. So it may mean that the level of insulin resistance that we have, that's with diabetes, perhaps could be linked with artificial sugar usage. So perhaps just have your normal sugar, have your normal meal, just have it after your complete meal. Don't have it at the beginning. Don't have it in the middle of nowhere within your meal pattern, whatever it may be. Perhaps have a bit more of the sugars earlier in the day, but not the first thing after your main meal. And then you're good to go, but don't have the artificial sugars that may be still increasing your insulin resistance and progressing diabetes. And in some analysis of artificial sugars that were used for your mice, we see that there's a whole slew of new microbes that just happen to grow when you use these artificial sugars in mice. It may indicate that there's some microbes that just grow better when this is around, or maybe they're eating this artificial sugar. And the influence of it, you don't really know, but all we do know is that people are still gaining weight. So if there's weight gain in this context, then you should have an issue of basically artificial sugars somehow causing some effect, maybe involving microbes that are growing too much, the wrong types, and have weight gain due to it. So over here we see blood glucose. It's a bit higher even though saccharin was used. So glucose appeared to be better processed and basically ultimately better for the diabetic case. Now, also there's usage of the sugars in toothpaste, and we see that whether it's diabetics or normal patients, when they use the non-sweet toothpaste, then the following day after using the toothpaste, we see that their saliva glucose levels are a bit lower. This indicates that there's overall a better sense either of insulin sensitivity or the amount of sugar that you have in your blood when you use a non-sweet toothpaste. So instead of using the artificial sugars that are in your toothpaste that may be influencing you in a negative way, you could try having a less sweetened or non-sweetened toothpaste. They're hard to find because unfortunately these companies want to market the other type. And we see triclosan that's also in some of the toothpaste and in some detergents. There's an odd relationship. It may have a connection with weight gain, but we're not certain. We see that when it's very high, then there's less weight gain, but when it's very low, then there is a higher amount of weight gain with it. So it's a bit odd out of a relationship, because the non-detectable level of triclosan in excreted fluids appears to not have an influence for body mass increase. So it's just something to think about. There may not be a connection necessarily with triclosan, but just one last thing to consider. And this is the very last thing that I will mention. It basically is a composite of everything that you can do. Whenever you have fat cells and they're overfilled, then they produce leptin. Leptin is something that drives your metabolism, makes you want to exercise, makes you not want to eat anymore, and also basically by driving your metabolism can prevent you from having insulin resistance, and it protects you from diabetes. So we see here that having overfilled fat cells, it produces a hormone, leptin, that prevents you from gaining weight. So that's good. But if you have obesity, then you have too much of the fat cells all the time producing leptin. You lose your leptin sensitivity, so then you have weight gain. So leptin levels, they're actually very high in people that are obese, but you're just not sensitive to it anymore. So in order to maintain your leptin sensitivity, you should be sure to not be in an overweight state for too long. If you're overweight, just try to go back, and then you can maintain your leptin sensitivity. Or basically, if you're chronically overfilling your fat cells, just give periods where they're not going to be, continuously overfilled. That way you could at least have periods of time where the fat cell is not going to be producing leptin. Because if the fat cell is not being fed excessively, then there won't be that spike of leptin. So this may also be relevant for that question that was there earlier about the intermittent fasting and a benefit that could come from it. If you do intermittent fasting, then you may be able to regain your leptin sensitivity. So that's a tool for it. But if it's not used properly, then you could still gain the weight right back because you'll have elevated cortisol levels. So this is a summary of all those tips mentioned in relationship to the reduction of cortisol and insulin. Those are like the main features to control. So It's important to not starve yourself, don't restrict your eating, have larger meals in the beginning of the day, be able to burn those calories, have the protein and fiber first, then the sugars last. Fats could still be in the earlier portion of the meal. Make sure to include those 4 categories in every meal. If you're avoiding sugars altogether, that should lead to weight gain. If you have a ketogenic diet, I didn't mention this earlier, but it tends to, you could tap into your fat reserves better, but it tends to reduce your overall metabolism because you're not making use of insulin. Insulin is still a useful tool for weight loss because it sustains your metabolism. If you're losing insulin altogether, then you won't be able to make use of that anabolic effect that comes from insulin. For instance, if you're weightlifting and you're on a ketogenic diet, it's really tough. Sometimes people would inject insulin in order to grow more muscle tissue. So to avoid insulin altogether could be an issue. So try to avoid that. Other tips, calmness, maximizing protein before bed, having vinegar for insulin sensitivity and metabolism boosting, spices, calmness, doing yoga, inversions, exercise. At any time that you have an energy surge, avoid being culturally normal. Do whatever you can to just be you. If you want to be different from the rest, then do that. But if you're fine with it, then it's totally fine too. Of just being like everyone else, we will generally gain weight as we age. But if ever you're against that, then don't be afraid to be culturally different or just be you. So if everyone's eating a burger and then you're going to have a burger with kale and then people laugh at you, so be it. Just do you, be you. And yeah, prevent boredom and prevent anxiety. These 2 poles, they're opposite, but the anxiety gives you too much cortisol. And if that's mixed with consumption of insulin, then you now have the recipe for fat cells. But boredom, you're less likely to be active and less likely to be stimulated. We know that euphoria and positivity and these hormones linked with euphoria and happiness, like dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and epinephrine, are all linked with weight loss. So try to live life to the best, laugh a lot, do what makes you happy, and that'll also contribute to your weight loss. You could basically splurge and watch something that makes you laugh, and then you'd be like, hey, this is going to contribute to my overall health patterns and everything, because hormonally it supports it. Standing while working every now and then, that could support your sclerostin levels. Avoid gluten-free foods because they may have high fat content while having low protein. Avoid the ultra-processed foods because they're linked with overall weight gain. Protein, add that to the vegan foods. Protein to anything is generally contributing well. Avoid alcohol because you may contribute to fatty liver, but in some cases, alcohol can help you to lose weight as long as you have it slowly, not too much, just sparingly. It may lead to fat reduction. And prevention of diarrhea. It's the opposite of what people may think, but all the studies are showing diarrhea is linked with obesity, maybe due to overeating, or maybe due to perhaps losing the right microbes. There's lots of conditions that could be linked with it and weight gain. So just try to avoid it altogether. And exercise can also be a tool to reduce your stress levels, and you could use it to raise your growth hormone levels. It's basically a hormone that represents your youthfulness. It could also raise your Osteocalcin levels that allows you to eat whatever you want and then still lose weight from it. And also there's vitamin K that allows you to prevent your insulin spikes because it allows your calcium fluctuations within your beta islet cells to be regular, not as crazy, not as high, so you don't over release your insulin. So vitamin K, it completes the design of your beta islet cells. And it's a vitamin, so please, consume it. Sometimes bacteria can consume it within you. So sometimes having the right bacteria is all you need, and then you don't even need to eat the leaves. But since you don't really know if you have the right bacteria and your gut is always changing, just try to eat the green leafy vegetables. Limit those sweeteners in the toothpaste. Try to have the less sweet one. Avoid the artificial sugars. And if ever you did gain weight and you're overdosing on leptin, just try to lower the leptin. Sometimes you could just eat a bit less in some cases, and then that allows you to sustain your leptin sensitivity. So in the future, everything will be clear up for days and days and weeks. It's important to sustain your leptin sensitivity as it's almost like insulin and boosting your metabolism. So yeah, I know it's many, many tips. We'll try to have this recorded so that you could see it in the future. And of course, I couldn't really see some of the questions that are there, but if anyone is still here and has questions, feel free to ask. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Michael. Like, I was disconnected in between, so in case somebody has put questions in between, I would not have received them. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to ask here. There are some comments for you, Michael, in the chat. They are all thanking you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much, everyone. I found a way to open it.
Would it be possible for you to share the presentation with everyone? Because like a couple of
Oh, yeah,
people
of
have
course.
asked for it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, of course. And yeah, I'm just glad that people are interested
Yeah.
in hearing it and seeing it. Yeah, that's yeah, fantastic. I could totally share it with you guys. And sooner or later, we'll have the video up online, so you could also view it there and have me say stuff over it. Okay. Let's see, I see the
Okay.
comment from, okay, yeah, I see one from the hall
Yeah.
now. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the intermittent fasting question. And yeah, that's a great question. And yes, the benefit of yoga, there's tons of benefits. In fact, to simply do inversions can really contribute to your weight loss journey, where, you know, you'll lower your heart rate, you'll have perhaps lower cortisol within minutes after doing yoga. If you were to pair this with your meal, then you are less likely to have the cortisol and insulin spike together. And you'll notice sometimes when you do yoga, you just you don't feel hungry because cortisol is up. You have less desire to eat when cortisol is up. But if you were to have that yoga done, sometimes you feel your stomach is just starting to growl. That's because now you're more capable of eating something because your cortisol is now going down. So sometimes doing inversions and just, maybe going on your knees and lying flat or putting your head down in any way, the calmness gets to you, and now you're not using your own energy reserves. You're going to use, energy from food. And believe me, you could go hours, you could go days without eating. It's possible. And as long as you're stressed enough, you won't have the appetite to eat. Like say there's a passing of someone that you loved and you're crying and everything, you won't want to eat. And that's because the cortisol is chronically elevated, among other things too. So if you're going through something that's chronically stressful, you're not going to want to eat, and you're not really supposed to either. And there's still benefits for your liver whenever you don't eat for a long period of time. It gives your liver a break, allows it to recover, and then you could reap benefits from the insulin-like growth factor that's produced from it. But the bottom line is this: if ever you are chronically stressed, you cannot really eat so much sweet things in particular. So it's good to do the yoga to calm down, and then you have that appetite back. And yeah, let's see if there's other
We have
questions.
a question in the chat that do you need to be careful if you are taking medication for blood sugar like metformin?
Yeah, in fact, I had a family member that was taking metformin, and metformin, although it's an anti-cancer and anti-diabetic drug simultaneously, so it's very cool, it's very nice, it also causes diarrhea. And you really have to be careful of that. It can lead to weight gain, even though you're not eating particularly lots of things. The diarrhea could get to you. It can make you feel uncomfortable, chronically stressed, and ultimately that leads to weight gain. For reasons that may be even beyond me, we know that the association is there of diarrhea and weight gain. So you may be eating more junk food or whatever it may be. Metformin could be a liability for your weight loss journey. But of course, whether it's for diabetes or prevention of cancer, it has its benefits. But I know the satisfaction rate for people taking it is very low. Lots of people are complaining about it because I know people that are on metformin, and if they could simply voice their concerns, maybe they wouldn't even use or recommend metformin for some people. They would just find another drug that could work it. But metformin is still kind of a gem because it targets cancer and diabetes simultaneously. But so can living a happy, healthy diet. I can tell you something, cortisol doesn't only increase your risk of weight gain. Chronic cortisol also increases your risk of cancer. So cortisol could literally bind to white blood cells and prevent them from wanting to sustain their life. So then it activates suicide responses because white blood cells take a lot of energy. So if you commit suicide responses for these white blood cells, then you save energy for the here and now. So cortisol is all about having energy here and now, taking energy from your muscles and liver, use it now so you get rid of white blood cells if it's chronically elevated. So then you're going to be more likely to get sick. And that includes less of the natural killer cells. Natural killer cells that normally target cancer, find it and eat it and kill it. You have your own protection from cancer. It's your white blood cells. And if you have chronically elevated cortisol, then you increase your risk of cancer. So don't be chronically agitated. Don't be chronically sad, scared, angry, overworked, not getting enough sleep. Then you will have cortisol elevated. And then you're going to increase your risk of cancer. But hey, these office jobs, they may not care about that because they're not you. And if you pass away, then they just get someone to replace you. But you have to care for you. And you have to make sure that your cortisol isn't always up so that it's not just for the weight thing, it's also for your own livelihood. You don't want to have a cancer cell that's there that could have been removed and then it switches from benign to metastatic, and then now it's a death sentence. So be sure to always do your stress reduction. That includes eating your sweets after your meal. That's stress reduction. Instead of using your own energy reserves because your blood sugar is low, you're instead going to use external reserves, and that gives your cortisol a break, prevents your cancer, prevents your obesity.